Have you ever felt lost in a sea of unfamiliar words and sounds, desperately trying to make sense of a language that seemed impossible to grasp? That was my reality when I first arrived in London with nothing but basic English skills and a dream to master this global language. My name is Ariel, and today I'm going to share with you the emotional roller coaster of my English learning journey, from struggling beginner to confident speaker. Welcome to LMJ English, where we believe that every language learning story can inspire and guide others on their own path to fluency. My journey wasn't just about memorizing vocabulary or perfecting grammar. It was about transforming my identity and opening doors to a world of new opportunities. Before we dive into my story, make sure you hit that subscribe button to join our community of language learners and get notified whenever we share more inspiring stories and practical tips to help you on your English learning adventure. Now, let's begin with how it all started. On a train in London with two English-speaking women and my first attempt at real communication. The beginning of my English adventure. It was a beautiful summer day when my journey truly began. I was sitting on a train in London, nervously clutching my English phrase book as if it were a lifeline. Across from me sat two women, chatting away in what seemed like impossibly fast English. Their words flowed together like a rushing river, and I could barely distinguish one word from another. At that time, I was studying English literature at university, but my actual language skills were still at a beginner level. The gap between academic knowledge and practical communication skills was enormous. I had always dreamed of mastering English since I was a child. Growing up in a non-English speaking country, I saw English as a magical key that could unlock doors to international opportunities, global literature, and connections with people from around the world. That dream had brought me to London, where I had enrolled in a literature program despite my limited language abilities. Some might call it brave, others might call it foolish. In truth, it was probably a bit of both. As the train rumbled through the London suburbs, I gathered my courage and decided to practice some of the basic English phrases I had learned. "Hello," I said to the women, my voice trembling slightly. "Beautiful day, yes?" They smiled warmly and responded, slowing their speech to accommodate my obvious struggle. Though I understood only parts of what they said, the fact that they understood me and responded kindly filled me with a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt before. It was a tiny victory, but in the journey of language learning, these small successes are what keep you going when the path gets difficult. That brief interaction taught me something crucial about language learning that no textbook could convey. Communication isn't about perfection. It's about connection. Even with my limited vocabulary and imperfect pronunciation, I had successfully communicated with native speakers. This realization became the foundation of my approach to learning English in the months and years that followed. Facing the mountains of difficulty, the initial excitement of being in an English-speaking country quickly gave way to the harsh reality of daily communication challenges. Everyday situations that native speakers navigated effortlessly became mountains I had to climb with great effort. Ordering food at restaurants often resulted in receiving dishes I hadn't intended to order. Phone calls were particularly terrifying, as I couldn't rely on facial expressions or gestures to help convey my meaning. Even simple tasks like asking for directions could turn into embarrassing ordeals when I misunderstood the responses. Pronunciation became my most persistent nemesis. The English language is notorious for its inconsistent pronunciation rules, and my mother tongue had completely different phonetic patterns. Words like thoroughly, throughout, and thought tied my tongue in knots. The distinction between short vowel sounds like in ship and sheep eluded me for months. I would practice for hours in front of a mirror, contorting my face in strange ways, trying to produce sounds that didn't exist in my native language. Grammar was another formidable challenge. I struggled with the seemingly endless tenses and their specific uses. When should I use present perfect versus past simple? Why do we say look at but listen to? The arbitrary nature of prepositions drove me to frustration on a daily basis. I would construct sentences in my head according to the grammar of my native language and then try to translate them directly into English, resulting in awkward, unnatural expressions that often drew confused looks from listeners. Beyond the technical aspects of language learning, there was an emotional toll that I hadn't anticipated. There were days when I felt like a child, unable to express my thoughts and feelings with the depth and nuance I could in my native language. My personality seemed diminished in English. My humor didn't translate well, my intelligence appeared reduced, and my confidence plummeted. I remember breaking down in tears after a particularly difficult day of misunderstandings and communication failures, questioning whether I would ever truly master this language. Cultural differences added another layer of complexity to my language learning journey. I discovered that knowing the words wasn't enough. I needed to understand the cultural context in which they were used. British politeness patterns, conversational taboos, and social norms were all embedded in the language in ways that weren't explicitly taught in textbooks. I learned the hard way that "how are you" was often just a greeting rather than a genuine inquiry about my well-being, and that responding with a detailed account of my day's troubles would be met with awkward silence. Finding my guiding light. My language learning trajectory changed dramatically when I met Professor Richards, an English teacher whose approach to language instruction was unlike anything I had experienced before. Our first meeting was almost accidental. After a particularly disheartening day of linguistic mishaps, I had retreated to a small bookshop to find solace among books I could at least partially understand. As I was struggling to ask the shopkeeper about an English grammar book, a kind-faced woman stepped in to help. This was Professor Richards, and that chance encounter would prove to be the turning point in my English learning journey. Professor Richards was not just knowledgeable about English. She had a gift for making the language accessible and enjoyable to learn. Unlike my previous teachers who had focused almost exclusively on grammar rules and vocabulary lists, she believed in teaching language through meaningful contexts and authentic communication. Language isn't just a set of rules to memorize, she would often say. It's a living, breathing entity that connects people across cultures and experiences. What made Professor Richard exceptional was her ability to identify exactly what I needed at each stage of my learning process. When pronunciation was my main obstacle, she introduced me to phonetics in a way that made sense to me, connecting the sounds to physical sensations and movements of the mouth. She would patiently demonstrate each sound, sometimes using humorous exaggerations to help me distinguish between similar phonemes. We practiced minimal pairs like ship/sheep or bat/bet through fun games rather than monotonous drills. When I struggled with idiomatic expressions, she didn't just present them as phrases to memorize, but explain their origins and contexts, turning them into memorable stories. Raining cats and dogs became a vivid image rather than an arbitrary expression. She encouraged me to keep an idiom journal, where I would not only write down new expressions, but also create situations where I could use them naturally. Professor Richards also recognized that my fear of making mistakes was holding me back from fluency. She created a safe learning environment where errors were treated not as failures, but as natural steps in a learning process. Every mistake is a learning opportunity, she would remind me. She shared stories of her own language learning struggles when she had studied abroad, normalizing the difficulties I was experiencing and helping me see them as temporary obstacles rather than permanent barriers. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of Professor Richards' teaching was how she connected language learning to my personal interests and goals. Knowing my love for literature, she incorporated literary texts into our lessons, gradually increasing their complexity as my skills improved. We would discuss themes and characters, pushing me to express more nuanced thoughts and opinions in English. She encouraged me to join a book club for English language learners, which became another supportive community in my language journey. Beyond the technical aspects of language instruction, Professor Richards became a cultural guide, helping me understand the unwritten rules of British social interaction. She explained the subtleties of British humor, the importance of understatement, and the appropriate levels of formality in different situations. These cultural insights proved invaluable in helping me navigate social situations with greater confidence and understanding. Strategies that changed everything. With Professor Richards' guidance and my growing determination, I developed a systematic approach to improving my English skills. The first and most important strategy was creating an immersive environment, even within the confines of my small London apartment. I labeled everything in my home with English words, changed the language settings on all my devices, and made a strict rule for myself: no native language inside my apartment. This self-imposed immersion was challenging at first, but it forced me to think in English even during my private moments. Consistency became my mantra. I established a daily routine that incorporated different aspects of language learning. Mornings began with 20 minutes of pronunciation practice, focusing on the sounds I found most difficult. I would read newspaper articles aloud, record myself, and then listen critically to identify areas for improvement. During my commute to university, I listened to English podcasts designed for learners, gradually progressing to content made for native speakers as my comprehension improved. I discovered the power of authentic materials in language acquisition. While textbooks provided a structured approach to grammar and vocabulary, they often presented an idealized version of the language that didn't reflect how people actually spoke. I began collecting authentic materials, menus from local restaurants, pamphlets from museums, advertisements from the tube stations, and studied the language used in these real-world contexts. Television became another valuable resource. I started with shows that used simpler language and clear pronunciation, then gradually moved to more complex programs. Technology proved to be an invaluable ally in my learning journey. I used language learning apps for targeted vocabulary practice and grammar exercises during short breaks throughout the day. Online forums connected me with other English learners worldwide, creating a community where we could share challenges and strategies. I discovered the joy of language exchange programs, meeting weekly with a British student who wanted to learn my native language. These exchanges not only improved my speaking skills, but also gave me insights into British culture from a peer's perspective. The strategy that perhaps contributed most significantly to my progress was shifting my focus from perfection to communication. Professor Richards had emphasized that the goal of language learning wasn't to speak without mistakes, but to communicate effectively despite them. This mindset change liberated me from the paralysis of perfectionism. Instead of rehearsing sentences in my head until they were flawless, I began to speak more spontaneously, accepting that errors were part of the process. I developed techniques for navigating conversations when my vocabulary failed me. Circumlocution, describing a word I didn't know, became a valuable skill. If I couldn't remember the word umbrella, I might say the thing you use when it rains to stay dry. This not only helped me maintain conversation flow, but often resulted in learning the exact word I was missing, as native speakers would naturally supply it in their responses. Writing became another cornerstone of my learning strategy. I started a daily journal in English, writing about my experiences, thoughts, and observations. In the beginning, these entries were simple and filled with errors, but they provided a private space to experiment with the language without fear of judgment. Over time, I could see tangible progress as my entries became more complex, accurate, and expressive. I also began writing short stories in English, which allowed me to play with the language creatively. One particularly effective technique I developed was what I called active observation. When in public places like cafes or parks, I would quietly observe native speakers' conversations, noting not just what they said, but how they said it, their intonation patterns, body language, turn-taking behaviors, and expressions of agreement or disagreement. I would then try to incorporate these natural patterns into my own speech, moving beyond grammatical correctness toward authentic expression. Moments of triumph and transformation. After months of dedicated practice and immersion, I began experiencing breakthrough moments that signal my transition from struggling learner to competent speaker. The first major milestone came unexpectedly in a literature class discussion about Shakespeare's use of metaphor. Previously, I had remained silent in these academic conversations, intimidated by the sophisticated language of my native-speaking classmates. But that day, something shifted. An interpretation occurred to me that hadn't been mentioned, and before I could second-guess myself, I raised my hand and articulated my thoughts clearly. The professor nodded approvingly, and several classmates built upon my comment. In that moment, I realized I had crossed an invisible threshold. I was no longer just processing English. I was thinking in it. Dreams provided another surprising marker of progress. About 8 months into my intensive learning journey, I had my first dream in English. I woke up amazed, realizing that English had penetrated my subconscious mind. These English dreams became more frequent, and though it might seem like a small thing, linguists often consider dreaming in a foreign language a significant indicator of advancing fluency. Humor represented one of the most challenging aspects of language mastery, so understanding and making jokes in English felt like conquering a linguistic Mount Everest. I vividly remember the first time I not only understood a British joke with its subtle wordplay, but also laughed spontaneously along with everyone else, without that awkward delayed reaction that had been my norm. Even more rewarding was the day I made a clever pun in English that sent my friends into fits of laughter. The ability to play with the language demonstrated a level of comfort and intuitive understanding I had once thought unattainable. Public speaking had been a particularly daunting prospect, but a presentation for my literature course became an unexpected triumph. I had prepared meticulously, practicing my delivery countless times. When the day arrived, I stood before the class, took a deep breath, and began speaking about the themes of identity in Jane Austen's work. I spoke for 15 minutes without relying on notes, responding to questions with relative ease, and even injecting some humor that landed well with the audience. The positive feedback from my professor and peers boosted my confidence immeasurably. Perhaps the most meaningful breakthrough came in building genuine friendships with native English speakers. In the early months, my social circle had consisted mainly of other international students who shared the struggles of language learning. While these friendships were valuable and supportive, I had longed to connect more deeply with British students. Gradually, as my language skills improved, these connections began to form naturally. I remember the profound satisfaction of having a 3-hour conversation with my British flatmate about politics, philosophy, and our personal histories, complex topics that required nuanced language, and realizing afterward that I hadn't once felt the mental exhaustion that typically accompanied extended English conversations. Cultural references had often left me feeling like an outsider, But as I absorbed more British media and history, I began to understand the contextual backdrop of many expressions and jokes. I could now participate in conversations that referenced British television shows, historical events, or cultural phenomena. This cultural literacy, combined with improved language skills, helped me feel like I belonged in a way I hadn't before. The most powerful transformation, however, was internal. I began to recognize that my English-speaking self wasn't a diminished version of me, but rather another facet of my identity, one with its own strengths and characteristics. Some friends even commented that I seemed different when speaking English, more direct and assertive than in my native language. I realized that learning a new language wasn't just about acquiring a skill. It was about expanding my sense of self and gaining new ways of expressing who I was, discovering culture through words. As my language skills deepened, I began to understand that truly knowing English meant more than mastering its grammar and vocabulary. It required understanding the cultural framework that gave words their full meaning. Language and culture, I discovered, were inseparably intertwined, each illuminating aspects of the other in ways that enriched my comprehension of both. The British concept of politeness revealed itself as far more complex than the simple please and thank you I had initially learned. I noticed how native speakers softened requests with phrases like, "I was wondering if you might possibly," rather than using direct commands. The frequent use of sorry in situations where no apology seemed necessary puzzled me until I understood it functioned more as a social lubricant than an expression of remorse. These linguistic patterns reflected deeper cultural values around personal space, non-imposition, and social harmony. Weather-related conversation, which had initially seemed like meaningless small talk, took on new significance as I recognized its role as a social ritual and neutral topic that allowed British people to communicate without revealing too much personal information too quickly. The rich vocabulary for describing slight variations in rainfall, drizzling, spitting, pouring, bucketing down, revealed how environmental factors shape language development and daily discourse. Humor proved to be one of the most culturally embedded aspects of language. British irony, self-deprecation, and understatement were initially confusing and sometimes even offensive to my more direct cultural background. When a British friend described a devastating breakup as a bit of a bother, I misinterpreted the gravity of the situation entirely. Learning to recognize these understatements and their actual emotional weight required cultural immersion beyond mere language study. Food terminology opened another window into cultural values and history. The distinction between tea as a meal versus a beverage, regional variations in naming bread rolls, baps, cobs, barms, and the elaborate vocabulary surrounding types of rain all reflected aspects of British daily life and historical development. Even simple words carried cultural associations I needed to understand. Pudding didn't mean what I thought it did, and biscuits certainly weren't what Americans called biscuits. Class distinctions, though less overtly acknowledged in contemporary British society, remained encoded in language use. Professor Richards helped me understand how vocabulary choices, pronunciation patterns, and even grammar usage could signal social background in subtle ways. These sociolinguistic insights helped me navigate social situations more effectively and understand the unspoken dynamics at play in various contexts. Literature took on new dimensions as my cultural understanding deepened. When reading British novels, I began to catch references, jokes, and social commentaries that had previously passed me by. Jane Austen's subtle critiques of social conventions, Dickens' commentary on industrial society, and even contemporary British fiction became richer and more meaningful as I understood the cultural context that informed them. Media consumption transformed from a language learning exercise to a genuine pleasure as I gained the cultural context needed to fully appreciate British television, radio programs, and newspapers. I found myself laughing at comedy shows that had once been incomprehensible and following political discussions that had previously seemed full of mysterious references and assumptions. My growing cultural literacy also affected how others perceive me. As I incorporated appropriate cultural references, humor styles, and conversational patterns into my communication, I found native speakers relating to me differently, less as a foreigner to be accommodated and more as someone who shared their cultural framework. This shift was subtle but profound, creating a sense of belonging I hadn't expected to achieve. Perhaps most significantly, this deepening cultural understanding gave me new perspectives on my own native culture. Seeing my home customs and values through the lens of a new language and cultural framework allowed me to recognize aspects of my own cultural conditioning that I had previously taken for granted. This comparative perspective enriched my understanding of both cultures and created a more nuanced worldview that transcended either cultural framework alone. The never-ending journey. Today, after years of dedicated study and immersion, I can confidently say that I have achieved a level of English fluency that once seemed impossible. I completed my degree in English literature with honors, write regularly in English for both academic and creative purposes, and navigate social and professional situations with confidence. Yet one of the most profound lessons I've learned is that language mastery is not a destination, but a continuous journey. There's always more to learn, more subtleties to grasp, more expressions to discover. While my grammatical errors have become rare and my accent less pronounced, I still occasionally encounter words I don't know or cultural references that elude me. The difference now is that these gaps no longer trigger the anxiety and self-doubt that once plagued me. Instead, I view them as opportunities for further growth and refinement. The perfectionist pressure I once placed on myself has given way to a more balanced appreciation of how far I've come and an acceptance that complete native-like mastery may always remain slightly beyond my reach. And that's perfectly okay. The professional benefits of my English proficiency have exceeded my initial expectations. Beyond completing my literature degree, my language skills have opened doors to international opportunities that would otherwise have remained closed. I've worked as a translator, contributed to cross-cultural projects, and built a network of professional connections spanning multiple countries. The global nature of English as a lingua franca means that my investment in learning this language continues to yield returns in unexpected ways. Perhaps even more valuable than the professional advantages are the personal transformations this journey has catalyzed. Learning to express myself in a new language has expanded my thinking patterns and problem-solving approaches. Research suggests that bilinguals develop enhanced cognitive flexibility, and I've experienced this firsthand in how I now approach challenges from multiple perspectives. My sense of identity has expanded to include my English-speaking self, with its unique expressions, humor, and ways of relating to others. The friendships I've formed through this language journey represent some of the most meaningful relationships in my life. The shared experience of language learning created bonds with other international students that transcended our diverse backgrounds. Meanwhile, my relationships with native English speakers have enriched my understanding of British culture and provided authentic context for language use. These cross-cultural friendships have broadened my worldview and challenged assumptions I didn't even realize I held. As my own journey continues, I've discovered a new passion for helping others navigate the challenges of English learning. I volunteer with community programs that support new immigrants and international students, offering both practical language assistance and emotional encouragement. Having experienced the frustrations and triumphs of language learning firsthand, I can empathize with their struggles while providing living proof that progress is possible with persistence and the right approach. When I reflect on the frightened student who once sat on that London train, barely able to construct a basic sentence, I feel immense gratitude for the journey that transformed her into who I am today. Every struggle, every embarrassing miscommunication, every hour of practice contributed to this evolution. The journey required not just linguistic aptitude, but emotional resilience, cultural curiosity, and unwavering persistence. For those currently in the midst of their own language learning struggles, I offer this encouragement. The path to fluency isn't linear or predictable. There will be plateaus where progress seems stalled and sudden breakthroughs when multiple elements click into place at once. The key is to maintain consistent effort while being gentle with yourself through the inevitable challenges. Find teachers and communities that support your growth. Immerse yourself as much as possible, and remember that every interaction, every mistake, every moment of confusion is moving you forward on the path to fluency. Language learning is ultimately a profound act of opening yourself to new ways of thinking, relating, and being in the world. My journey to English fluency has given me not just a valuable skill, but a broader perspective, richer relationships, and a more expansive sense of who I am and what I can become. It is, without question, one of the most challenging and rewarding journeys I have ever undertaken, and one that continues to unfold with each passing day. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through my English learning experience. I hope my story has inspired you to persevere through your own language learning challenges and to see them as stepping stones rather than obstacles. If you found this story helpful, please don't forget to like this video and share it with friends who might be on their own language learning adventure. Your support helps our channel grow and allows us to reach more learners around the world. Do you have your own English learning story? Or perhaps a question about language learning strategies? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Your experiences and questions could help others who are walking the same path. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to LMJ English for more inspiring stories, practical tips, and engaging content designed to help you achieve your English language goals. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our new videos. Remember, language learning is a journey, not a destination. Every step you take brings you closer to fluency, even when progress feels slow. Keep going, keep practicing, and keep believing in yourself. Until next time, this is Ariel wishing you success on your English learning journey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in our next video. Vocabulary list. Fluency. Noun, the ability to speak a language smoothly, easily, and expressively. Example: achieving fluency in English became my ultimate goal. Immersion. Noun, the state of being deeply engaged or involved in something, especially a language environment. Example: complete immersion in an English-speaking country accelerated my learning process. Persistence. Noun, firm continuance in a course of action despite difficulty or opposition. Example: my persistence through challenging times ultimately led to success. Breakthrough. Noun, a sudden, dramatic, and important discovery or development. Example: understanding my first English joke was a major breakthrough in my language journey. Pronunciation. Noun, the way in which a word is pronounced. Example: English pronunciation rules often seem contradictory and confusing. Vocabulary. Noun, the body of words used in a particular language. Example: expanding my vocabulary became a daily priority. Comprehension. Noun, the ability to understand something. Example: my listening comprehension improved dramatically after watching English television shows. Intimidating. Adjective, making one feel frightened, timid, or nervous. Example: speaking in front of native English speakers was intimidating at first. Nuanced, adjective characterized by subtle shades of meaning or expression. Example: understanding nuanced expressions took much longer than basic vocabulary. Cultural, adjective relating to the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a society. Example: cultural understanding was essential for true language mastery. Perspective, noun, a particular attitude toward or way of regarding something. Example: learning English gave me a new perspective on communication. Idiomatic, adjective using, containing, or denoting expressions that are natural to a native speaker. Example: idiomatic expressions were particularly challenging to master. Confidence, noun, the feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something. Firm trust. Example: building confidence was as important as building knowledge. Plateau, noun, a state of little or no change following a period of activity or progress. Example: after 6 months, I hit a plateau where my progress seemed to stall. Proficiency, noun, a high degree of competence or skill, expertise. Example: my proficiency eventually allowed me to study literature in English. Adaptability, noun, the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions. Example: adaptability is crucial when learning a new language. Perfectionism, noun, refusal to accept any standard short of perfection. Example: overcoming perfectionism helped me speak more freely. Resilience, noun, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Toughness. Example: resilience helped me bounce back from language learning setbacks. Perseverance, noun, persistence in doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving success. Example: perseverance ultimately determines success in language learning. Transformation, noun, a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance. Example: the transformation from struggling beginner to confident speaker was remarkable.